Welcome to another episode of Hardcover Feedback. I am Kelly Campos.
And I'm Brandy Smits.
Today we've got three very interesting, very new novels for you. First up, we have a multicultural coming-of-age story. Second, we've got a story of a bear gone wrong. And thirdly, we have the story of, it's a kind of a dystopian science fiction novel.
The first novel we're talking about today is called House on Mango Street by Sandra Cisneros. And you know, it's sometimes heartbreaking, sometimes deeply joyous. The House on Mango Street tells the story of Esperanza Cordero, whose neighborhood is one of harsh realities and harsh beauties. Esperanza doesn't want to belong, not to her rundown neighborhood and not to the low expectations the world has for her. Esperanza's story is that of a young girl coming into power and inventing for herself what she will become.
In English, my name means hope. In Spanish, it means too many letters. It was my great-grandmother's name, and now it is mine. She was a horsewoman, too, born like me in the Chinese year of the horse, which is supposed to be bad luck if you're born female. But I think this is a Chinese lie because the Chinese, like the Mexicans, don't like their women strong. My great-grandmother, I would have liked to known her, a wild horse of a woman, so wild she wouldn't marry, until my great-grandfather threw a sack over her head and carried her off, just like that, as if she were a fancy chandelier. That's the way he did it. And the story goes she never forgave him. She looked out the window her whole life, the way so many women sit their sadness on an elbow. House on Mango Street.
The interesting thing about The House on Mango Street is that it is not a novel in a complete form so much as it is many vignettes like weaved together to tell a story.
Right, yeah.
And there's really no explanation of how long or what period of time like the novel takes place. You just kind of go day by day. Could be months in between vignettes or hours.
Or years.
Or years.
It was left to your own discretion as far as what you took from it in terms of the time. Like it seems at some points it seems like she may be 10 or 11, at other points it seems like she's 14, 15, there's really no telling. I think that's one of the good things about the book is that there are so many things that you can put on to the vignettes. They would make very interesting monologues for anybody who's interested in acting or anything. I think some of them would work very well as a monologue in terms of that. It was a little disjointed for me, even though it wasn't supposed to be novelistic. I kind of expected it to be a little more tied together, and it really didn't do that, which left me feeling a little unsettled in terms of, like, I didn't quite know how I was following things along.
I agree. It was just, you never knew exactly what was going on and who these people were, because it jumps from person to person to person about, this is my uncle so-and-so, and this is my cousin. I don't remember any of the names. But,
yeah, there are a lot of names.
There's so many names in this book, it's impossible to keep track.
Yeah.
But you're really kind of jumping around where when people are mentioned twice, you're like, oh yeah, I remember them, and you flip back and you're like, oh yeah, that little itty bitty paragraph.
Exactly.
I definitely didn't get into it as much as I could have,
right.
I think.
The basic thing that you can take from it, from the name, The House on Mango Street, is that the main character moves into this house with her family. They've been living in apartment, and finally they live in a house, but it's not the house that they thought they would live in. They were hoping to live in a much nicer house with, circumstances, et cetera, and now they live in this house on Mango Street that she does not want to identify herself with because it's a rundown house. It's, got broken stairs, et cetera, and the neighborhood isn't that great, and she does not want to identify with that. Well, that makes sense. After that, it was just bounce, 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 bounce.
Well, the connotations of the neighborhood themselves just interpret her feelings of why she doesn't want to live there. Everyone that she talks about is someone who can't get out, and they're stuck in this, depressing life. And
right.
She wants to find her way out, but everyone keeps pushing her back. Her aunts and stuff are like, no, you must stay with your family. Your family is all you have. Don't worry about making anything for yourself. You will be a wife, and you will be happy.
Right.
It's really disappointing to think that people would tell their kids that.
Jeez, thanks. The one vignette I really did enjoy, just because I thought it was cute, was when someone gave them, the main character and two of her girlfriends, a bag with shoes in it.
Yes.
And they were very girly, very high-heeled, very womanly shoes. And you get the impression, or I got the impression, that at this point in the story, they're roughly 12 or
12.
13, maybe, just on the verge of about to start thinking about becoming a woman. And they put on these shoes and they teach themselves how to walk in the heels, and they practice walking up and down the block, and they feel so good because people are saying things about, oh, those are some nice shoes, blah, blah, blah. But then they skirt the edge of danger when they start talking to the bum and saying, hey, you like these shoes? And he's like, yeah, I like the shoes. Come over so I can see them closer, you know. And, you know, after a short conversation, they get scared and run away.
Right.
So that one vignette to me showed not only the joy and the, you know, fun of childhood, but also just that edging into, okay, wait a minute, I can't do the same things I used to be able to do as a kid all the time, you know.
It's another example of the atmosphere, you know, having innocence portrayed as something and then totally corrupted by the environment that they live in.
And we have to say that this book is one that has been very popular. It's renowned all over the place. So as we always say, our opinions are our opinions, and they cannot be replaced for anyone else's opinions.
That's right.
So all in all, while I found it well written, I did not enjoy this novel as much as I thought I would and hoped I would, and I'm giving it 2 stars.
I agree. I just could not get into it, and it was a chore turning the page. So I got to give it at 1.5 stars.
All right. Well, House on Mango Street, 2 stars from me, 1.5 stars from Brandy. We'll be right back.
Hello, my name is Brittany. I would recommend anyone and everyone to read Twilight. Based on a dream, the author Stephanie Meyer creates an addicting story of forbidden love in action. It's a story of a teenage girl named Bella who falls in love with a vampire named Edward. They can't be separated, but yet when they're together, Bella's life is at risk. How can she ever keep a balance? To find out, read Twilight and continue on the adventure with the rest of the Twilight saga.
Welcome back to Hardcover Feedback. Next up, we have Winky by Clifford Chase. Very interesting story of a bear gone horribly wrong. After suffering decades of neglect from the children who once loved him, Winky the teddy bear realizes that taking charge of his fate is as simple as deciding that he can do it. Just as he's discovering the joys and wonders of mobility, self-determination, and even love, Winky's luck ends. Having come upon the cabin of a reclusive professor, the bear finds himself suddenly surrounded by an FBI SWAT team who instantly conclude that, of course, he is the evil mastermind behind dozens of terrorist attacks that have been tracked to this forest. Terrified and confused, Winky is suddenly brought to trial on charges of terrorism.
All right. Okay. I'm going to read one of my favorite parts of this book. In the big gray hospital, the doctors could only play at treating Winky. They huddled around x-rays that showed only his metal parts, eye sockets, joints, squeaker. They murmured strings of complicated words. The nurses pretended to draw blood, and the lab sent back readings of air. It reminded everyone pleasantly of their medical training when they practiced only on dolls and cadavers, with nothing much at stake. The bear was carted around on gurneys and hooked up to various tubes and machines. At least once a day, detecting no breath and no pulse, they administered CPR, then electric shocks. Clear, they'd yell, and Winky got the jolt. No response, clear. The shocks were thrilling, but the bear tried not to make a peep. Just when the doctors and nurses seemed to have lost all hope, when they were about to pronounce the time of death, Winky would begin quietly singing, beep, beep, beep. His imitation of a heart monitor was poor, but that wasn't the point. One by one, the medical personnel lifted their heads in joy. Winky liked this part of the game best. You've done it again, doctor, a pretty nurse might say. Saving lives is my job, a handsome doctor would reply.
Winky. Winky, Winky, Winky. This book, okay, first of all, we have got to discuss this fake ER scene before we go any farther.
That encompasses the
Entire novel.
just stupidity of everybody in this book was right there. That's the
Exactly.
best way you can describe it.
Exactly. I mean, they're literally looking at x-rays of a teddy bear. And instead of saying, hello, it's a teddy bear, they're like going along with this farce just because he's can move and thing, they're deciding, well, he must be some sort of DNA experiment and he's alive and we'll take blood. There is no blood. There's no blood. It's air. It's a teddy bear.
Okay, so basically, Winky was a bear, and
Right.
he was, an unhappy bear because every once in a while, the kids would get done playing with him and they throw him away. Mm-hmm. So he's like, okay, well, I don't want to be a bear anymore. I want to get up and run around. So he does, and he's happy about it.
Which that is the first point that I find very interesting in this novel. It's basically about taking charge of yourself
Exactly.
and just deciding to do it. So this teddy bear decides and has enough passion about leaving the confines of his shelf, which he's been left on this shelf for a long time. He belonged to a girl named Ruth. Then when Ruth grew up and had kids, he belonged to each of her 3 or 4 kids.
Yeah.
And every time he was loved and hugged and thought the world of until it was time to put him on the shelf. And then he was left alone for years and years and years.
Well, Cliff was the last owner, and he
Right.
was in his 30s.
In his 30s
so
by
he
the
had been on
time-
that shelf
for a long time. 20
time.
plus years. Finally, Winky decides, you know what? I'm going to get up and go out the window. And he does. Now, there are some very strange ways of discussing this that I will not mention. Nothing bad, just graphically natural. We'll leave it at that. And as you're reading it the first time, you might be like, ew, why did they didn't have to say that. He didn't have to. But he was doing it on purpose, I felt, to make it as gritty and as non-cutesy as possible, because they were saying he's not this cutesy teddy bear that everybody thinks he is. He's an individual with with hopes and dreams and everything else, which he decided to phrase it in a particular way, which was interesting. Now, the main point of the book, or the main part of the book, is where he's on trial for terrorism.
I think we need to say right now, because we really haven't said it yet, this is not a kid's book.
Oh, yeah.
It may be about a teddy bear, but this is not a children's novel. This
Not
is an
at all.
adult novel. So please don't give it to your kids to read.
Like, oh, it's a cute little story about a bear named Winky.
It's not for children. Please don't give it to your kids. Okay, now we can keep talking.
Now we can keep going.
I thought we forgot to mention that, and it's kind of
We
important.
did. Terrorism is the
Yes.
main point, which that should tell you right there that it's not a kid's book. They decide that since they can't find anybody else at this cabin, and they've traced all these terrorist attacks to this cabin in the woods, that, well, it must be the teddy bear. Well, it's not. There's really no evidence that points to this kid, or this bear, rather, I'm sorry, having been the terrorist. In fact, there's all this evidence to the contrary, as far as the professor who was there, why he died, which I won't go into, what he did before he died that hurt Winky so bad, which I don't think we should go into either because it's so pivotal.
Yeah, and it was such a surprise.
Right, it was totally a surprise. And yet they insist that this is what happened. And so by deciding on the guilt first, they invent all this evidence to the point of literally bringing like Galileo on the stand, or an actor being Galileo
I just remember
on the
that part.
stand at a real trial, and like everybody's acting like this is okay. It's
That was one of the other best parts when they had witnesses. They're like, some of the witnesses don't want to come and face the defendant
this
here because
terrorist, 'cause
it's
he's so
just- it's too hard.
scary.
It's too hard. So there's like one lady that was in a hotel in like the early 1900s, and it's like a 22-year-old girl, and they're like, oh, well, did you work at that hospital or that hotel? Well,
yeah.
yeah, I did. In 1902, you worked in the. Yeah, I did. And you're just, what is wrong with everybody?
And they let it
proves,
pass.
It proves that this is a satire novel on terrorism, how people
Exactly.
freak out at just the littlest inclination of maybe a terrorist act being committed. And so
And
it
they
just goes
find
crazy.
anything they can
Anything they can.
and it's blame, and it's finding somebody else to be the bad guy,
Oh, yeah.
finding somebody to be the bad guy so they can lock up that bad guy, regardless of whether it's right or not, and regardless of whether anything even happened or not. So having said all that, there are some very good things about this novel. There are also some very strange passages. Like, some of the writing is just a little odd, and
Yeah.
you can't really wrap yourself around it. And I found myself skipping over certain passages just to get going with the story again,
Right.
and find out what happens to this weird little bear that you, for some reason, kind of like, you know. So all in all, although I enjoyed it, if you go in knowing that you're going to skip over a few and it's not going to, you know, be a consistent like tearjerker or anything like that, then I think you'll enjoy the story. And I gave it 2.5 stars.
I also gave it 2.5 stars, which is very odd because we don't usually agree. But I agree, and there are parts where you're just like, okay, be done. But I do have to say one thing. When you're reading this book, there are illustrations and pictures, which we need to show at least one of these pictures in here, because they are just so funny. Okay, here.
Show the bear.
We're gonna show the bear. Okay, you see the
His
bear?
mugshot.
It's his mugshot. And there are various pictures similar to this throughout the book, and that itself will give it an extra half star. So, all right.
Just for the photos. So, all right, an even split for me and Brandy, 2.5 stars for Winky, and we'll be back in a few minutes.
Margaret Wise Brown is best known for her book Good Night Moon. One of her lesser-known children's books is called The Big Red Barn. And while Good Night Moon can seem quite repetitive, especially after the 100th bedtime reading, The Big Red Barn is not at all repetitive. It takes place on a farm, in a barn, with a lot of animals, without any kids. And it gives you a lot of time to go through what each of the animals sounds like and what the animal looks like. And even better, as the day goes, the pictures get a little less bright, a little less vivid, and they help you put your child to bed, which, as we know, is the point of a bedtime story. So please check out Big Red Barn by Margaret Wise Brown with pictures by Felicia Bond.
Welcome back. Our final book this episode is The Handmaid's Tale by Margaret Atwood. Now, The Handmaid's Tale is told through the eyes of Fred, one of the unfortunate handmaids under a new social order. Set in the near future, The Handmaid's Tale describes life in what was once the United States, now called the Republic of Gilead, a monotheocracy that has reacted to social unrest and a sharply declining birth rate by reverting to and going far beyond the repressive intolerance of the original Puritans.
I go back along the dimmed hall and up the muffled stairs, stealthily to my room. There I sit in the chair with the lights off, in my red dress, hooked and buttoned. You can think clearly only with your clothes on. What I need is perspective, the illusion of depth created by a frame, the arrangement of shapes on a flat surface. Perspective is necessary. Otherwise, there are only 2 dimensions. Otherwise, you live with your face squashed against a wall, everything a huge foreground of details, close-ups, hairs, the weave of the bed sheet, the molecules of the face, your own skin like a map, a diagram of futility, crisscrossed with tiny roads that lead nowhere. Otherwise, you live in the moment, which is not where I want to be. But that's where I am. There's no escaping it. Time's a trap. I'm caught in it. I must forget about my secret name and all ways back. My name is of Fred now, and here is where I live. Live in the present, make the most of it. It's all you've got. Time to take stock. I am 33 years old. I have brown hair. I stand 5'7" without shoes. I have trouble remembering what I used to look like. I have viable ovaries. I have one more chance. Handmaid's Tale. Definitely a dystopian novel.
This shocked me. I did not know when I read what the reviews were, and I just had no idea what to expect from this. It was really dark.
Very dark.
but at the same time, enlightening. I don't know. I mean, that's the best way I can put it. It's very strange.
It definitely. Well, to get people on the same page as us, what this is after birth rates have declined and there's a lot of social unrest and things.
There was some kind of war or something. They
kind
don't
of
go into
details, right?
But
So
some kind of civil war.
something shakes up the U.S. of A, and this group of people steps forward with this very puritanistic attitude and very strong military force that basically take over the U.S. and it becomes the Republic of Gilead. And women's roles are reduced to reproduction, basically. And you can either be a handmaid, which are these people who give birth if they have, like she said, viable ovaries, or you're a wife, which the wives don't necessarily have children. In fact, usually they don't
And
have
they're
the children.
usually very,
They're
very
usually rich,
or powerful.
and a little bit older. And or you could be a cook type of person, a cleaner type of person, you know, that type of servant character, but only if you don't have those viable ovaries. And it's the most important role as being a handmaid, but it's also one that's kind of looked upon a little bit
Little shifty. No one knows what to think about that.
right. And then for men who are a little less well-to-do, they might have someone who actually fills all three of those roles, as far as being a wife and a childbearer and a cook / cleaner or whatever, which sounds similar to some people today,
Yeah.
but in a bad way is what this is. And
Yeah,
women's
you
roles
don't
were all-
want that.
Exactly, you don't want it, not in this society,
No.
definitely. And you're known as what you do by the color of clothing that you wear. The handmaids wear red, which is why she speaks about her red dress buttoned up and things like that. And now they also mention that she physically remembers what it was like to wear jeans in college. So it's not an old, like this, she's not grown up in this society.
It's within
a
the last
new society.
10 years,
Yes,
probably.
within the last 10, possibly even 5 years that all of this has occurred. So it's very immediate for her. It's very immediate for you as you're reading it. And it's a very interesting novel because the culture changes so quickly, and it shows how fast things become normal that you once would have thought were absolutely insane. You know, because so many weird things happen that they just have to put the blinders on and keep going. Like when they were walking past the wall,
Yeah.
and there's a wall at the edge of this town, and they hang people on the wall and let them stay there so that you see them as you walk by. That's weird. You
It
know?
was like back in the day when they used to have, you know, men in stocks, and they'd, you know, use that as warnings, and it was almost as if instead of creating a new world, Margaret Atwood looked back into past worlds, made it into the present with similar aspects, you know, that they still have cars and stuff like that. But in all respects, they went back.
Right.
And they, you know, have to experience, you know, no electronics. No, there's, you know, no one has, you know, electronics, but, you know, there's hidden ones. I know that the
people-
commander, her boss,
Master,
I don't know what you call him,
boss,
but he had some stuff stashed, some magazines that were, you know, taboo.
contraband.
Yeah. And
that's-
cigarettes, I think, were
that-
also
yep.
contraband.
That brings up an interesting point. The commander and the handmaid are only supposed to meet under very ritualistic circumstances for procreation with the wife in complete concert. The wife is there. It's a very ritualistic thing. Now, the commander wants intimacy with this woman. And by that, he wants her to play Scrabble with him.
Yeah.
And wants her to kiss him as if she means it. And that's it. That's what he wants from her, because he doesn't get that from his wife. So again, but he wanted that from other people as well.
Yeah.
We won't go into that. But it's very interesting how her intellect is what he
Yeah.
actually wanted from her. It's a very interesting way that they combine past and future, like you said. And I found it very telling when we found out where she wrote this book.
Yes.
And she was on vacation in West Berlin,
and lived in Alabama.
And that's kind of how that world was created. And once you know that, it totally makes sense. West Berlin before the wall came down.
Yeah, this is an older
Right.
older novel.
Right. It's a new classic, but an older novel. So all in all, without giving the ending away, which is always our
Oh
issue.
yeah, that's the biggest problem of everything.
Without giving the ending away, giving enough of the flavor of the book, I really, really enjoyed this novel for the issues it brings up as far as identity, women's power or lack thereof, the power you give away, the power you can take back, things like that. Really enjoyed it, and I gave it 3.5 stars.
I agreed. I really loved this, and I didn't, like I said, I didn't know what to think. There were some other people I knew that were reading it that were really interested, so I thought, hey, let's try to read this one. And I love these kinds of dystopian society things of how the world could be, and I loved it. I have to give it 3 stars.
All right, 3.5 and 3 stars for The Handmaid's Tale by Margaret Atwood. Let's recap.
Okay.
We've got The House on Mango Street by Sandra Cisneros, 2 stars for me, and 1.5 from Brandy.
Yes.
We
got Winky over here. We got 2.5 stars from Kelly and 2.5 stars for me. Tied.
And then, and then Margaret Atwood's The Handmaid's Tale, 3.5 stars for me and 3 stars from Brandy. That wraps up this episode of Hardcover Feedback. Thank you so much for joining us. Remember, all of these books, as well as any others you can think of, are more than likely available at your local public library. If it's not there, ask them. I'm sure they can get it from somewhere. Until we see you next time, keep reading, and we'll see you. Bye.